if there's something you want, you need about 5 arguments about why you want it. Because the probability that the person who's opposing you will have 5 arguments about why you shouldn't have it is very low. They just won't have thought it through enough. So the other thing that happens in the future authoring exercise is that you're asked to articulate the reasons for all the goals that come out of your vision of the future. So you're asked, like, why would it be good for you? Why would it be good for your family? Why would it be good for broader society? So that gives you 3 levels of argumentation right there. And if you have it articulated down into detail and it's related to other important goals, then you're a hell of a thing to argue with, because people just aren't that deep, by which I mean they just don't have that many levels of explanation or objection. And it's also really useful in relationship to your own mind, because if you want to do something that's difficult and that requires energy, a lot of different subsystems in your mind are going to throw up objections. It's like, well, maybe that isn't what you should be doing right now. Maybe you should be doing the dishes or vacuuming or watching TV or looking at YouTube. Or if you're really sneaky, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows, and anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember, is don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man, they're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. One of the things that predicts salary across time, for example, is agreeableness, and it predicts it negatively. And so it's part of the reason why women get paid less than men. And this is something for the women in the class to really listen to, because how you get paid across time depends on a very large number of things, right? It depends on your skills and your abilities and your position and your social network and all of that. But the other thing it depends on is whether or not you actually go ask for money, or maybe that you don't even ask, because actually you don't ask for money. You tell people that you need to be paid more, or something they don't like will happen. And I don't mean as a threat. I mean that you have to be willing, when you're negotiating, to have an alternative. You go talk to your boss, who isn't going to give you money, because everyone wants money, right? It's a competitive game. You're going to have to go there and say, look, here's what I do. Here's why it's useful. Here's why you have to give me more money. And this is my opportunities if you don't. And then you're not taking your boss's money anyways, because it's very frequently the case that he's working for a whopping big company. But he needs an excuse to give you money, because everyone's asking for money all the time. And so you have to put your case forward powerfully and disagreeably. Now, you don't want to do it too disagreeably, because then he's going to think that you're a son of a bitch, and maybe he's not going to give you anything, and maybe you'll get fired for being mouthy and all of that. And that certainly happens to people who are too disagreeable. You got to get the balance right, but it's definitely the case. And the other thing that happens to women that's also worth noting, and this is probably because they're higher in negative emotion, is they tend to underestimate their own utility in business settings, right? Because if you're trying to evaluate what you're like, and you're more tilted towards negative emotion, then the things that you do that are wrong are going to stand out more on the foreground than the things that you do that are right. So if you go into a negotiation and you're uncertain already because you have self-doubts, and then you're agreeable in the negotiation, what's going to happen is that you're not going to win as often. And winning in a business setting or in a career development setting means more opportunity for promotion and more revenue generated. Now, the downside of that, of course, is as you climb the business hierarchy, is that you also have to take on more responsibility, and that responsibility is sometimes unpleasant as well, especially to people who are agreeable, because you're not necessarily liked if you're in a position of authority. And agreeable people really like to be liked. It's their primary motivator, because they're concerned about the maintenance, I would say, of intimate, positive relationships. And that also makes them conflict avoidant. The downside of being agreeable is that you're not very good at putting forward your own interests. you will make less money across time. That's already been well established. And that's because you don't have teeth, not enough. And so in the little micro contests that you're going to have every day, you're going to incrementally lose to people who are more aggressive, who have bigger teeth. And that's what happens. Piaget was correct about that. He basically pointed out that what should happen is, let's say with your aggression, and hopefully you have some, is that it gets socialized. You learn how to play games, but you don't drop your drive to win. You integrate that in the games. And so you try to win, you try to play hard, but if you're defeated or you hit something negative, you don't respond negatively, and you can keep that all bounded within being a good player, a fair player. And that means what's happened is you've learned how to play a game or a set of games that also includes the darker parts of you, and they actually become part of your force of character. It's way better if you can pull that off. And that's what you definitely want to do as an adult. Like, all you people are going to have to learn to negotiate on your own behalf. And that's really hard. It means that you have to know what you want. You have to be able to communicate it. And you have to be able to say no. And to say no, you have to be built on a solid foundation. You have to have options. So you got to remember that as you go through your life. It's like, if you don't have options, you can't negotiate with someone. And if you're not willing to use them, they win, period. Because if you're asking your boss for more money, say, the answer is no. Because he doesn't have any spare money lying around that he can just give to you. And lots of other people are asking. So some of that's zero-sum stuff, you know. Not all of it, because often you cooperate with people and the whole pot can grow. But some of it's zero-sum. And so you better have a case made. It's like, here's how much money I should have, here's why. Here's the benefit to you that will accrue if you do it. Here's the consequences that you don't. They're actually real, they will cost you, and I will do them. It's like, then you can negotiate. And you don't do that rudely. But those arguments, you better have them in order. Like, so for example, if you're going to negotiate for a raise or a status shift, you better have your resume at hand, all polished up, and know where else you're going to look for a job, and you better be able to get one. Because otherwise you're weak, and you will not win the negotiation. Place yourself so you can negotiate, because otherwise you're just a facade, and in a real battle, a facade is just torn down right away. Negotiation is actually a practical issue to some degree. Like, the first thing is that you have to figure out what you want. Because you were saying, well, it's not merely rational. It's like, yeah, that's for sure. You have to bargain from a position of authority, let's say, not power. Authority is a better word. But you don't have authority unless you know what you're talking about, and unless you can bring some, let's say, force. That's not the right word. You can't negotiate with anyone unless you can say no. And you can't say no unless you've set yourself up with alternatives. So when you go to your boss and you negotiate for a raise, you need to have the sort of CV that enables you to go find another job. And you have to have your CV prepared. And you have to have looked for another job. And you have to be able to get one. Because then you can go in there and say, I'm not as productive as I could be at my current level of remuneration. It's not reflective of what I'm able to do. And I want this, and this is what will happen. If you give me this will be the good things that will happen. And what do you think of that? And the person is going to know, even by the way that you hold yourself while you're having the discussion, whether or not you're someone with options. And you can't fake that. Well, you can, but it's not helpful. Like, it just doesn't work for very many iterations. You have to, it's not rational. You're preparing yourself for battle. That's what you're doing. And you can't be weak when you prepare yourself for battle. Because if the person says, no, I'm not giving you a raise, which is exactly what they should say, because what are they going to do? Just like sprinkle the money around? You need to be able to say, okay then, there will be consequences that you don't like. And that's what it means to say no to someone. No means, if you continue to push this, things will happen that you don't like. Now in that case, it'll be, I'll depart and take my talents with me. And if they don't care, well then you're in the wrong business, or you don't have any talents to begin with, right?